Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.
I was doing some Bible study, and I want you to turn to Matthew 22. The book of Matthew 22. Last week we were talking about walking with God and some of the features that went with these men that walk with God. So Matthew chapter 22, and we're going to go to verse 34 when we get there. In the marketplace with a special greeting, and to have men call him Rabbi or Rabboni. But you are not to be called Rabbi, even though they were disciples of Messiah. They were not even to be called or addressed on any level, even the remote level. And you'll see that right now. For you are not to be called Rabbi, for you have only one master, and you are all only brothers. You're all equal. And do not call anyone on earth Father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. And that's interesting, like I've pointed out in the past. That there's a major church with over 1 billion in membership that call their priests Father. Why do they do that when Jesus Christ says, do not call anyone on earth Father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven? Why would he say that? Because were they doing that? Well, why would he say it if it wasn't relevant? Nor are you to be called teacher, not even teacher. For you have one teacher, the Christ, and you are my disciples. But don't forget, he's also addressing the crowds. The greatest among you will be your servant. Imagine that. For whoever exalts himself, whoever thinks that he's something that he's not, will be humbled. And whoever humbles himself or herself will be exalted. How does that happen? Because he takes a personal interest in one who has the ingredients, the backbone, or whatever, for whatever reason, to go against the natural carnal nature, the natural strain in mankind, which is to puff oneself up, to elevate oneself, to worship your own vanity. And we've seen a lot of that, even in the churches of God. And we ourselves partake of these things from time to time, but we must strive and struggle with the help of God to humble ourselves. And then he goes on to say this publicly. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. Very powerful language. You shut the kingdom of heaven in men's faces. And I've seen this. You yourselves do not enter because of your practice, because you don't practice what you preach, what he just said. Nor will you let those enter who are trying to. Which is the worst thing of all. It's one thing for you to believe what you believe and to practice what you practice. You made your own personal decisions. And you have to answer to them personally before your God and before your Creator. But it's quite another to lead others astray. It's quite another to corral. It's quite another thing to corral others. Wrong. And it's wrong on a whole other level. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You travel over land and sea. You go to great lengths to win a single convert. And when he becomes one, you make it twice as much the son of hell as you are, because you've led his life on a self-righteous course that is absolutely against what was shown to you in the law of Moses, which is humility, which is loving your neighbor as yourself. Don't forget what he had just told them. If they were sincere in asking him, then they would receive his instruction wholeheartedly. But they were trying to test him, to trap him. Love your neighbor as yourself. But instead, they make that convert twice as much the son of hell, twice as much the son that's leading to destruction by their habits than they themselves are. Woe to you, blind guides. And there's blind guides all over the place today. Some are just outright false, and some are blind. You say if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, the offerings, he is bound by his oath. He has to give it. You blind fools. Which is greater, the gold of the temple, or the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that's on it, the material gain, he is bound by his oath. You blind men. Which is greater, the gift on the altar, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears by it and everything that's on it. And he who swears by the temple swears by it and everything that is on it, and everything that dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it. Do you not realize what you're doing? Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices and your mint and your dill and your cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law. You give from your abundance, but you've neglected justice, mercy, and faithfulness. The very things that you should be practicing and also leading others to practice yourself. Instead, you put an emphasis on material gain. You buy your way. You should have practiced the latter, the justice and the mercy and the faithfulness, without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, you squeeze out a gnat, but you swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and the dish, right? You're ceremonial. Everyone can view what you're doing and they think that you're righteous. But inside, you are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of your cup, of your vessel, and then the outside will also be clean. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside. Right? Now there can be no mistake about his words. He's being very clear. He's giving analogy after analogy. You're like whitewashed tombs, painted, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. He's giving an analogy of how they are. You wear these fancy clothes, you love to be greeted, you love the seats of the places of honor and the seats of position in the synagogue, and yet you're nasty. It's not real to you, because it's not addressing your attitude. It's not addressing your heart. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, just like I said. But on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets, and you decorate their graves, the graves of the righteous. And you say, oh, if we have lived in the days of our forefathers, we would not have taken part with them, their forefathers, in shedding of the blood of the prophets. And when you say this, you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Full up then the measure of sin of your forefathers. Then he gets very strong. You snakes, you brood of vipers. He's saying this publicly. And to the ruling class of the day. The average person was so afraid of these people that they wouldn't admit that the one who was doing miracles right in front of them, raising the dead, healing lepers right in front of them, was the Christ. Because as soon as they said that he was the Christ, they and their family would be out of the synagogue. They would be out of the community. They would be banished. That's how much pressure these people brought on the public. So he called them snakes and a brood of vipers. How will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore I am sending you prophets, and I am sending you wise men and teachers. They're not calling themselves rabbi. They're not calling themselves teacher. No one's laid hands on their head. No one's laid hands on their head. They've been sent. I'm sending you prophets and wise men and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Don't forget, what prophets came after Matthew? Matthew 23 here, where we're reading. The prophets that he was talking about before, the prophets that their forefathers had persecuted and killed, they were already dead and in their graves. That's why he said, you guys decorate their graves, you honor their graves, but yet you're the descendants of those who killed them. And you have the very same thing in your heart. Because they had a father as well, just as much as you. And that father was a murderer from the beginning. That father was the devil. Who's he talking about now? All the prophets already lived. They're all back here. Christ is saying, I will send you prophets and wise men and teachers. Well, where are they? Well, the disciples were such. They lit the world on fire. Maybe there's more, who knows? But we know that Christ said he will send them. I am sending you prophets and wise men and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Who's he talking to? He's talking to a generation that in 30 to 50 years will all be dead. Who's he speaking to? I will send you prophets and wise men and teachers. When? When he's resurrected. He will inspire these men to come forward. And they will be persecuted right from day one. They will be abandoned. And yet his words will be in their mouth. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth. Who's he talking to? Just a bunch of self-righteous brood of vipers? Or is he talking to the very same spirit that's been behind this type of attitude, the very one who planted the weeds among the wheat? When Christ said, an enemy has done this, planted the weeds among the wheat. And it's very clear, very emphatic. Those weeds are the children of the devil. That's what it says. That's what Christ said with his own mouth. That's what he said in John chapter 8. You want to carry out your father's desires. You want to murder me, even though I've done nothing to you. It's going to be the same way with anyone that is an extension from Jesus Christ. As a follower or as one who is sent. As a teacher, as a wise man, or as a prophet. They're going to persecute them. They're going to abandon them. They're going to murder them. They're going to beat them up. That's what it says. Some of them you will flog in your synagogues, and you will pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all of the righteous blood. Now he's speaking something very different here. That has been shed on earth. And now he's talking about some major history. From the blood of righteous Abel. These men weren't alive then. To the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered. Who's he talking to? These men weren't even alive then. Their forefathers were. And it's the same spirit that was behind these men that are persecuting the Christ. It's the same spirit that was behind their forefathers who persecuted the prophets before them. Whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Zechariah. I tell you the truth. All this will come upon this generation. Which generation? Which generation? That generation? No. The generation that is still left standing with the same spirit that's guiding them against those who have been sent by Jesus Christ right up until the end, pursuing them, persecuting them, abandoning them, talking slanderous, rotten things about them, and murdering them, finally. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who are sent to you. And we know there are two final prophets to come that will die in Jerusalem. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chick under her wings. How tender is that? But you were not willing. Look, your house is left you desolate. For I tell you that you will not see me again. Here's something very key. For I tell you that you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And I believe that this last portion was his last public statement before he was betrayed, before he went into relative hiding, as the scripture points out, because the Jews were trying to kill him at that time. And everybody knew it. And it was time for the feast, and his brothers taunted him and said, why don't you go to this feast? Anyone who wants to become a public figure doesn't hide himself away. Your disciples are waiting for you. Why don't you go? They knew that the Pharisees wanted to kill him. It was very clear. This, I believe, was part of his last statement, at least publicly. After this, the Pharisees never asked him another question. The Sadducees had been silenced, and the only thing left to do now was to fulfill the very purpose that he had come for. And that had two angles. The one was the willingness of the Son to obey the Father even unto death, like it says in Philippians, right? And the other part of that was the children of the devil, those weeds that were going to carry it out. It's a stage. This was a play that was all too real. One play that had been cast and written a long time ago, even in the flesh of men by their God. And now the one who was supposed to crush the head was waiting for his heel to be bruised. Matthew 24. So he said, you will not see me again until you say what you were supposed to say, what has been prophesied to say. And it is the same only at the end, when they heralded him, when he came into Jerusalem, riding on a donkey's colt. Matthew 24, verse 1. Jesus left the temple, and he was walking away. When his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings, and then Jesus said, do you see all of these buildings, this marvelous structure? I tell you the truth, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one, and he was emphatic about that, every one will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, out of the limelight now. He said, you will not see me again. He stepped out of the public eye. He stepped out of the limelight until the final chapter, until the final part was to be fulfilled. So as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. And they said, tell us, when will this happen? When will this temple be destroyed? Not one stone, one left on another. And what will be the sign of your coming? They knew he was to come again. That's why they asked him. And at the end of the age. They also knew that there was going to be an end of the age and a saturation point. They knew Daniel. They knew the scriptures that were pointing that out. Jesus answered right away. And again, while you're reading this, you need to ask yourself, who is he talking to? Watch out that no one deceives you. Or do you think that any of these disciples, these apostles, were deceivable? None of them were deceived. Every one of them, most of them were martyred, with the exception, as we know, of John. We believe that everyone else was martyred, was murdered and killed. None of them were deceived. Who's he talking to? Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming that I am the Christ. Right? And of course, there's been a school of thought where people have thought that others are going to rise up and say that they're Jesus Christ. Well, how many of those have appeared on the earth? Not very many. He said many. Many will come in my name, saying that I am the Christ. There can only be one meaning for that. It's meaning that they say he is the Christ. They admit that he's the Christ. But they use it to deceive. Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming that I am the Christ, and will deceive many, using my name to do it. Now, I pointed out months ago that at this time, if you were to admit that Jesus was the Christ, you were thrown out of the synagogue, or you were pursued and killed. But you were handled very roughly. Now Jesus is turning to them at that time when you could not publicly admit that he was the Christ, and he's telling them, many will come in my name, saying that I am the Christ. Who's he talking to? He's not speaking to that time, because that never happened. He's talking about a time when these religious views that Christ's name would become accelerated. And that everyone would know the name Jesus, but would not understand who that man was, who that being was. They wouldn't have a clue. When most Christians think of the word Jesus, and they have a mental image in their mind, they picture a long-haired, effeminate-looking guy. And yet the Bible is very clear in the Old Testament when they prophesied about his appearance, the appearance of Messiah, that he would be a man of comeliness, that he wouldn't be a handsome man, and that he would have no advantage. He would have no charismatic way about him that would cause us to be attracted to him. The Bible itself says it's a shame for a man to have long hair. And yet why do we have this image? Who is this image of? It isn't of Jesus, who slipped away into the crowd many times because he looked like an average Jew. And he wasn't handsome by any means. And yet at the same time, he carried himself with a particular kind of authority that people absolutely resonated to, were drawn to, and that resonated with. When he whipped them out of the temple and drove them out, nobody argued with him. He flipped over their money tables. Nobody dared argue with him or cause a problem or try to beat him up. What kind of a spirit was behind our Lord? Well, we know. It was the Father. It was the Father. And the people recognized when he opened his mouth, not when they looked at him. They recognized when he opened his mouth because he spoke as one who had authority, but not as the Pharisees, who were wishy-washy and hypocritical. Many will come in my name, claiming that I am Christ, and using my name to deceive many. So that's one factor that I want you to remember. That is a sign of the time. Because don't forget what the disciples had asked him. What will be the sign of your second coming and of the end of the age? That's the information that they were after. So now he's giving them that information. And here's one of the signs. Many will come in his name, saying that he is Jesus. Jesus, Jesus. And will deceive many by that way. That's sign number one. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Right? There will be skirmishes, contentious actions, man against man will be rising more and more. You'll hear wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Right? Such things must happen. Right? But the end is not, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And we've had 2 world wars in the last century. The next world war that we have could quite possibly, at least absolutely, has the capacity to wipe out all life from the earth. And we'll read forward here where he says that if those days were shortened, no flesh will be saved alive. So nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. So there can be no mistake about how he is settling in this message. It's the same as a woman that's about to go in labor, who is eventually going to give birth. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted. Right? So the first sign is many will come in my name, claiming that I am Christ, and will deceive many. You will see, the geopolitical world blowing up. You'll see nation rising against nation. You'll see famines and earthquakes. You'll start to see things in succession that you didn't normally see. And natural things as well. Earthquakes. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted. That's the next step. And you will be put to death. Who's the you he was talking to? Those disciples didn't live when there was famines and earthquakes and beginning of birth pains, signs of the end of the age. They were long dead. Who's he speaking to? Who's being put to death? Who's being put to death? Who's he talking to here? He's not talking to those disciples. The message is not for them. Because the end had long, far away from the end of their life until the real end and the second coming. And that's the question they asked him. So who's he trying to convey this information to? Ask yourself that question. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death. After nation rises against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. After earthquakes and famines in various places. After the beginning of these birth pangs, which is the sign of the end. These disciples were dead for centuries. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted, and you will be put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith, and they will betray and hate each other. And we've seen the ingredients of that. When brethren are not allowed to talk with brethren, when so-called leadership and those that are supposed to be ordained by Jesus Christ, right, as a succession of having hands laid upon their head, absolutely go against Christ's own words when he says, don't even call yourselves teacher. Don't even call yourselves rabbi. And that the greatest among you will be as one who is a slave to the rest. At that time, many will turn away from the faith. Why? At that time, who's he talking to? And they will betray and they will hate each other. And another sign, and many false prophets will appear, and they will deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness. And we can definitely see that. Like I always say, if you're standing at a point where you can pivot and look at the generation behind you and understand how they felt and what kind of morals that they held to, what kind of lifestyle they had, and then you look in front of you, why is there such a contrast in comparison? And if you're standing in a generation where you can pivot and look at both, you're standing in that generation. Use your head. Think about it. There's something very unique. Because at no other time could we pivot in such a way and see such a sharp contrast. Because of the increase of wickedness, that's another sign, an increase in wickedness and immorality. The love of most will grow cold. We see that today. People are disconnected. They're not personable. They're totally wrapped up in themselves. All of us. We are a product of our environment. And because of a lack of adversity, we have a lack of humanity. Because we have a lack of character that comes by way of having that adversity in place. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved. Another sign. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. Who's he talking to? He's not talking to those disciples that have been dead for a couple thousand years. He's talking to those who would be alive and be affected by those very conditions. You can't watch for these conditions if you're dead. He's talking to the generation of those followers that would be followers of his at that last hour. Where we now stand, of whom we now are, or at least we call ourselves that. So when you see standing in the holy place, the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel. And then there's an extra caution here. Let the reader understand. There's a turning point here. But let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Right? Because now it's time for that birth. The pains have been culminating and leading to this saturation point and climax. Now let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of his house. That's how quick this is going to happen. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in the winter or on the Sabbath. What flight? He's saying you're gonna have to take off so quick and so fast. If you're in the field planting or harvesting or weeding, don't even go back to get your coat. You will not have the time and you will be caught up in it. That's how sudden this is going to come at the end. He's giving you all of these things. Let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Get out of there. Just like Sodom and Gomorrah. Get out of the city. It's going to be destroyed. Let no one on his roof of his house go down and take anything out of his house. Get down the ladder, run. Don't even go in the house because you'll be caught up, you'll be done. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. So he's giving you enough examples. So we as the readers need to understand the application. So how dreadful it will be in those days. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now. He can't be more clearer than that. He can't be more clearer than that. For then there will be great distress, unequaled. Think of his words. From the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. A time such as never been, or a time such as never will be again. If those days had not been cut short, supernaturally, no one would survive. Now when he's saying this to the disciples, because don't forget, he's still saying this to the disciples, even though he's speaking to us. That generation of followers that would be called as a result of the catalyst of their work, having been personally taught and tutored by the mouth of Jesus Christ. Subsequently, the work that would spread around the world and survive right up until the end. My church will never be finished off. It'll be a little flock. The gates of hell will never prevail against that church. It'll be extant and it'll be alive when I come back. And it's here right now on the earth. So says Jesus Christ. And I often wondered, where are my brothers? Where are my brothers? But would I be a brother to them as I would expect them to be a brother to me? And that remains a very deep question. And one that we need to examine in our own character and the own inside. We need to wash our vessel on the inside, like Christ told the Pharisees. Then the outside will be clean. So if those days have not been cut short, like I've always said, how could those disciples understand that? That there would be no one alive, no flesh saved alive. All flesh on the planet would be dead. A meteorite? A great earthquake? What would have destroyed everybody? They had no association. Not in the same way that we do today. When we understand today how this planet can become totally without any living creatures on it, then that tells you what generation that you're standing in. Because you have the capacity. And because you have the full understanding of how this is possible. They didn't back then. So that also is a sign. If you're standing at a time when we have the capacity to totally annihilate all life on this planet many times over, then you know what generation you live in. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, who are they? Who's this elect? Those days will be shortened. For this elect, for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. So that's definitely something that you need to look into, who the elect are. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, because they will, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear. Now he has said this over and over through this whole narrative. Let no one deceive you. For many will come in my name, saying that I am Christ, but will deceive many. At that time, right, many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. After people abandon the faith, it's a process. And after they betray, and then they hate each other. Because the days are wicked, the days are evil, the love of many will grow cold. For false Christs and false prophets will appear. Again, he's warning. And they will perform signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. Just like it was not possible for the disciples. At least it never happened because of what they were now grounded in. See, I have told you ahead of time. Remember who is speaking. This isn't some man. This isn't some man. This is your God. See, I have told you ahead of time. Aren't you lucky? So if anyone tells you, there he is out in the desert, do not go out. Or if they tell you, here he is in the inner rooms, like we are in a hotel, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east, and it is visible even unto the west, so it will be with the coming of the Son of Man. You will see me, and you will know. No one will have to tell you. You will know. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. And I still don't think we understand that. Wherever there's a carcass, well, there the vultures will gather. Right? Birds of a feather flock together. And they flock together for a reason. Christ is saying that these are vultures. And they gather for the carcass. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be severely shaken. At that time, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, most likely a star, the same way that it was when he was born. We don't know. And all the nations of the earth will mourn. Won't they be happy? They will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, and from one end of the heavens to the other. And when the high priest asked him in his home, when they were beginning an illegal trial, right? And they brought him to the house of the high priest. Why? Because they had to do this quietly. The high priest looked at him and asked him directly, are you the Son of the Most High God? And he answered him. Part of his answer included that they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And then he says this, and he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect, there's that word again, the elect, from the four winds and from one end of the heavens to the other. Right? And what that simply means is there will be some that are standing there at that moment and at that time. Like Paul said, we will not all sleep, but we will be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. That's what Paul said. But there are those who are gathered in there, will be gathered from the graves, those who have died in Christ. They will be resurrected. That is the first resurrection. Now Christ says, now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all of these things, you know that it is near. Yes, it is right at the door, and I'm telling you that now. When you're standing in a generation when you can pivot and compare such a contrast between the moral compass of one generation to the other while you stand in the middle. And while you, in the span of a single generation, can see such change. When you are standing in a world that has the capacity to completely annihilate itself, this is the season, and it is upon us. When you see these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth. This generation that can see this will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. These very things that I have talked to you about. That generation will not pass away. They will not live out their span until all of this has happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. He's telling you. And most people will sleep right through it. They don't get it. I just told you right here. Even so, when you see all of these things that I've described, then you know it is near. It is right at the door. And I tell you the truth, this generation will not pass away until all of these things have happened. He can't be more clear than that. A 10-year-old child can tell me what he means. I'd ask that 10-year-old child, he'd say, well, yeah, all these bad things that the man was talking about, he's saying that it'll happen when you start to see certain things, certain signs. And you know that it is just like summer coming when you see things that are starting to sprout on the trees. A 10-year-old child could tell me what this means. So many people miss the understanding and they fall back asleep again. Maybe there's a reason for it. Continuing here in verse 36. Because this is all continuous. Right? The Pharisees come and ask him a question. He shuts them up publicly. Then he goes on to talk about how they are publicly. It's an end game. How are they going to respond after he publicly calls them out? A brood of vipers and snakes and hypocrites. This is very strong language. And he's the only one that did it. The other one that did it was John the Baptist, and he went after Herod because Herod had his brother's wife. The Pharisees were supposed to do that, but they didn't bother because of the money and because of the politics. John the Baptist did, and he lost his head for it. And now it's Christ's turn. He publicly called them out. It was an end game on both sides. No one knows about the day or the hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor even the Son, but only the Father. And it was, as it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. In other words, the conduct of the generations have completely eroded to the point where, just like it said in the days of Noah, that the thoughts of man's heart and that he had in his heart were evil all the time. It's a saturation. As in the days of Noah. It was the evil that was grieving God, and it reached the capacity. The sin of the Amalekites had not yet reached its full measure. And that's what's happening. There's a saturation point. Anyone understands that? For in the days before the flood, before this disaster came, the very disaster that I'm telling you, if you see these signs, then you are in the generation that are going to be experiencing it. All these things will be done. That people were eating and drinking, they were marrying and giving in marriage right up until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. And I tell you that they say Noah was a preacher and teacher of righteousness. Who was he saying? To whom was he preaching? Very common knowledge that we know that he had not one single convert. Because people went, the guy's nuts. He's building a boat in the middle of nowhere. He's talking about this climactic end. I'm going to go to my daughter's wedding. This guy's crazy. And when the time came, the floodwaters came. And they were dead. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. And that's exactly the same conditions that are going to happen right now. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken, the other one will be left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill. One will be taken, and the other one left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this. This is what Jesus is saying. But understand this. If the owner of the house had known at what time in the night that the thief was coming, well, then he would have kept watch, and he would not have let his house be broken into. So you, like that man watching over his home, because you've been told ahead of time, must also be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. And then he goes in to say something very obscure, and I believe hidden until the time whose ears it was supposed to serve. But you be the judge. Don't believe me. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, who the master has put in charge of the servants in his household, to give them their food at the proper time? What's that about? We don't know. It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. I tell you the truth. He will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But suppose that servant, now he's getting into a completely different thing. The first part of that verse, he was talking about something else completely. About one who would be put in charge of the others, that would be giving them their food. What food? At the proper time. When you eat to live. What food? Spiritual food? at the proper time? Who knows? I tell you the truth that he will put him in charge of his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away a long time. And he then begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. And that master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he is not aware of, and he will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. And here's something very, very poignant. And there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now there's other references in the Bible that reference to that they'll be thrown outside, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's talking about the kingdom. And this is all going into the same narrative. At that time, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 of them were wise, 50%. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. Right? Just the oil they had in the lamp. The wise, however, took oil in jars as a supply, along with the lamps. Everyone understood this. The bridegroom was a long time in coming. And they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight, the cry rang out, here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him. Then all the virgins woke up and they trimmed their lamps, turned them up, now that there was light. The foolish one said to the wise, give us some of your oil, our lamps are going out. No, they replied, there may not be enough for both of us and you. Instead, go to the one who sells oil and buy some for yourselves. But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and then the door was shut. Right? Later, the others went to go buy the oil. They also came, and they knocked on the door. Sir, sir, they said, open the door for us. But he replied, I tell you the truth, I don't know you. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. So he's going into a narrative, and each example that he's giving expresses different components until he reaches the final one. Here's the next one. Again, it will be this kingdom of heaven, as when it comes, will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants, hey, come here, and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to the other he gave 2 talents, and to another he gave 1 talent, each according to his ability, his capacity. He who has been given much, much will be expected. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 talents went at once and put his money to work, and he gained 5 more. Well, there was a reason why he got 5 to begin with. Because the master knew. That servant, I'm going to give him 5. Because of his prior performance, or because of his capacity. So also, the one with the 2 talents gained 2 more. There's a reason why he gave him 2. But the man who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Again, in reference to a lacking. In reference to a lacking and an understanding of what to do. There's a reason why he gave that person 1. Right? He who has nothing, even what he has will be taken from him and given to the one who has much. After a long time, the master of those servants returned, after a long time, and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more for you. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, and now I will put you in charge of many things. Put him in charge of what? Come and share your master's happiness. The man who had 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents, and see, I have doubled it. I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. The same acceptance, even though he gained less, but he doubled what he was given. You have been faithful with a few things. Now I will put you in charge of many things. Same reward. Come and share your master's happiness. Same reward. Then the man who had received the 1 talent came, and he said, Master, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering when you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, because you're such a shrewd master and a tough guy. So I was afraid, and I went out and I hid your talent in the ground, and see, here is what belongs to you. He didn't squander it. He didn't spend it. He gave it back to him. His master replied, You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvested where I have not sown. You knew I was a tough guy. And I gathered where I have not scattered any seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned I would at least have received interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. This is a mystery. Whoever does not have, even what he has, will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness. You ready for it? Where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now when we started this narrative, and I'm about to close, when we started this, Christ was being asked, which is the greatest commandment. He's being tested. And he said to love your God with all your heart and your mind and your being. And to love your neighbor as yourself. What were these people lacking? Now he comes down to the final story, the final comparison. And in this final comparison, he reveals all. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all of his angels with him, this is very different than the others. He will sit in heavenly glory. All the nations will be gathered before him. And he will separate the people one from another. Are you catching that? He will separate the people one from another. Why? As a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right, and he will put the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, the sheep, Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you. Are you ready for it? Since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. He didn't talk about spreading any gospel. He didn't talk about doing any work. He talked about how they were with their fellow man. Remember what he said from the mouth of your God. To love your God with all your heart and your mind and your body, your being. And to love your neighbor as yourself. This sums up all of the commandments and the prophets. This is what it's all about, people. Then he went on to dress down the ruling class of the day, how they were hypocrites, how they were lording it over the people and putting burdens on top of them. And now, after he went through the parable of the virgins, after he went through the parable of the wicked and the good servants, now he's getting down to describe exactly what he requires and how he requires it to be implemented. What did the 5 talents mean? How did the guy gain the other 5? He wasn't talking about money. He was talking about faithfulness. He was talking about the pursuit of what that master expectations were. What are our God's expectations? He just told you. He put the sheep on his right, and he said, Come inherit the kingdom that has been destined and created for you since the creation of the world. What kind of plan is that? Then the righteous, in verse 37 of chapter 25, then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we see you thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you that you were a stranger and invite you in? When did we see you needing clothes and clothe you? And when did we see you ever sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, I tell you the truth. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did also personally unto me. This is the key. The example of a heart that's been set and fashioned by the Holy Spirit. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, just like the virgins that are out of oil knocking on the door. He says, go away, I don't know you. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. He's talking to the weeds. He's talking to those who have been motivated by their father. For I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you did not invite me in. He's getting very specific of his expectations. I needed clothes and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison and you did not look after me. And they will also answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? And he will reply, I tell you the truth. Whenever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do it for me, when it became an opportunity to do so. And then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. In other words, they knew better. They made a conscious decision to not do so. And part of our problem today in the churches of God is we are being distracted. There, I said it. We are not doing Christ-like things. Here it is in black and white. And you can suppose and go through all the scenarios of the 10 virgins, 5 that had oil, 5 that didn't. You don't need to bother. He just came down and told you with the sheep and the goats exactly what it came down to. The increasing of adding 5 talents to the 5 that were already given is he had given you the capacity and the opportunity to serve in the same way that he led his own life, to love your neighbor as yourself. This was also loving your God with all your heart and your mind and your being. That's why he said, when you did these things to your neighbor and you loved him as yourself, you were loving me. Do you understand? Do you understand what I'm saying to you? When you've done these things to the least, you have also done them unto me. In other words, I planted this heart in you and this spirit in you. I gave you the capacity to double what I planted. And the only way that you can double it is to love your neighbor as yourself. And by loving your neighbor as yourself, you are doing these very things unto me. You are worshiping and loving. You're serving your God with all your heart and your mind and your being.